It is 6 o'clock. It is Tuesday. We have cat thunder rampaging all throughout our realm here. That's hilarious. The second we go live, the cat just runs through the room rampaging like there's some sort of imperative cat reason to do that. Well, how do we sound?
Catnip.
Is volume okay? Cool. Well, hello and welcome to our weekly Fire and Blood live streams. It's History of Westeros back again. It's 2K19, as you can see on my shirt. Shay also has Game of Owns represented. Zach Louie of Game of Owns is in town helping us do some recording, helping us produce our Bloodraven 3 episode.
Yeah, he brought his very cool red camera and all of his microphones and is recording it for us. So in 4K, I think we're going to downscale it to 1080p, but it'll still look very nice.
Yeah, we've already recorded the intro and the outro, which we did a little something different for, so... yeah, we should be getting that done within the next 5-6 days. We'll see how that goes as always, but it's getting close, very close. But today, we are going to talk the Hour of the Wolf and the Pact of Ice and Fire and Cregan Stark and a lot of these other cool characters that are involved in that particular episode of both pre and post Dance of the Dragons. So that's a lot of great stuff to talk about. A lot of fantastic parallels included there as well, as always. And we have an excellent guest with us today. Nina Friel, say hello.
Hi.
Good to have you.
Good to be here.
Yeah. So tell everybody where to find you, what you've been working on, and give us just your high and low, 2-minute version of what you think of Fire and Blood and all that so far.
5 seconds. Well, that's not going to be in 5 seconds.
Yeah, I already given you a big challenge as your first question.
No, it's fine. My name is Nina. I write on Tumblr, goodqueenaly.tumblr.com. I answer asks, and I write posts, and I very occasionally write essays, and I even more infrequently write Shakespeare-style history plays about the Targaryens. And every Wednesday, I do Housewords Wednesdays, where I take a house that doesn't have words, and I give them words. So... a little bit of everything on Tumblr.
Right on. Yeah, I like the Housewords Wednesdays. Those are cool because there are a lot of houses without words. And
this has been going on for 3 years. I've done it
wow.
for 100, so there's a lot.
So have you ever gotten really close to what the actual words were when they've been revealed later a couple of times like that?
The only time I started this back in 2016, the only words we've gotten since then are my Farman words, which are nowhere near
okay, yeah.
actual Farman words were.
It would be cool if you actually nailed it.
Do you count the House Frey words?
Oh, no.
Just curious.
Yeah, I guess that one's unofficial.
Written in the book,
yeah.
then I'll count them.
Okay. Super chat from Mara Lee. Cats rule. Love your channel and the content. You both rock. Thanks, Mara. I think maybe we should unleash the cats at the beginning of the episode more often. Also, thanks to our patrons. We have Jeff Gnarly, the Long Snapper, History of Westeros' First Sword. And our dragon riders, we have Talanis the Talon, King of Gogossos, rider of Telarius, a red dragon with scales, horns, and talons of Midnight Black. And we have Robert IV of House Ardeacor, Burned King of Blazewater Bay, rider of Atraxis, the black dragon with bioluminescent spots like smoldering embers, and a banded blue tail. We've talked about dragons quite a lot in our Fire and Blood coverage. In fact, that's what we did all of last week. But not much dragon talk today, but there will be a little bit because of the Pact of Ice and Fire, you know. They always sneak in there somewhere. Those dragons, I tell you. For really large animals, they are able to squeeze in very tiny spaces. A couple of announcements before we get into the main bit here. We are still preparing. We have a Sea Snake episode that we're preparing that we were thinking was going to be soonish, but we're going to move it a couple weeks out. A lot of artwork is being prepared for it. Really, a huge amount of artwork is being prepared just for it. So we want to make sure there's plenty of time for that.
By Drafturgy, at Drafturgy on Twitter, which you probably heard in the previous weeks. I was talking about that, but you'll get to see that, next month.
That's right. So right now, next week's episode is TBA because we're moving a few things around, but we'll announce that shortly after this episode comes out. Also, I want to announce there is a Game of Thrones board game official tournament survey that we would like to share with y'all. It comes from Amin of a podcast of Ice and Fire. He's trying to get the game a bit more traction, and with enough people answer the survey that will encourage more tournaments
Yes.
to be held.
And you can see that link on your screen, or if you're on YouTube, you can just look at the YouTube description and click the link. Or if you're in the live chat right now, you can click the link I put there. You have many options
Right
for
on.
how to get to this survey.
And if you're listening on the podcast afterwards, which we always put up on Acast, then we'll put the link in the description for that as well. So a lot of different ways to find it. And you should be able to find it on our social media as well, or through a podcast of Ice and Fire social media. Infinite ways. Today, of course, we're going to, as always, do our parallel lives, but yeah, I got kind of ridiculous with this one because we're not actually going to do parallel lives this time. We're going to do Sarallel lives.
Yeah. It did make me laugh when I saw it in the document, I have to say. I thought it was good.
I believe what I texted you is, I can never trust you again.
Yeah, it was something like that, yes. George has played with all the different, with the name Sarra, and we've got S-A-R-A, we've got S-A-R-R-A, we've got S-E-R-R-A, we've got S-A-E-R-A, so yeah, we're going to talk about them a bit too. But we'll start off in the north. We have the official art of Cregan Stark from Doug Wheatley here, talking to young Aegon III. It really looks like a father and son thing, but that is not his son. That is not his kid. Although he is an Aegon III. Aegon III is a Jon parallel, and Cregan, maybe not a Ned parallel, but there's some Ned vibes.
He sure looks like Ned there.
He does look like Ned. Yeah, he does look like the Stark, doesn't he? Okay, so, Cregan was born in 108. And he's the son of Rickon, so we've got another Rickon, and his first son is going to be named Rickon, so there's lots of Rickons going around. And Lady Gillian Glover, whom we know nothing about, other than she died before all this. He became Lord of Winterfell at 13 in the year 121. His uncle Bernard took over as regent and kind of held on to power, and then Cregan kind of managed to overthrow him in a scene that kind of is kind of foreshadowing for what he's going to do at King's Landing later, bringing in his men and throwing this sort of usurper in prison. Not exactly what he does in the South, but it's kind of similar type of move. And then he marries Ara Nori. That's his first wife, but she dies in 128, which is right before all this Hour of the Wolf business, or right before the Pact of Ice and Fire and the Dance of the Dragons and all that kicks off. So that's our initial setup. So, Nina, why don't you tell us a little bit about this, these couple of years before the Pact and some other stuff about the North and about Cregan?
Absolutely. Well, specifically in terms of Aranori, not that I'm super thrilled that we get another woman who dies in childbirth in Fire and Blood.
Yeah, lots of those.
That's an issue. But pretty much all we know about her is that she's sort of a beloved childhood companion of Cregan. But I think what's interesting and what we can get in this chapter is we can kind of take away what Cregan might have liked about Ara and what she was like, based on what Cregan likes about other women. So with the Norries, the Norries are obviously one of the Northern Mountain clans, so they're living in the very, very far part of the North. And the Norries in particular are the ones who are living closest to the gift. This is, we learned this in A Dance with Dragons. So even though the Norries are still aristocrats, they're still nobles in terms of their social rank, they live a kind of almost more tribal sort of nobility. It's very much a more kind of almost primal. It's, the Nori is not Lord Nori, he's the Nori, and they live in kind of a more a sort of a more tribal existence when it comes to the nobility of the North. And I think, one of the things I talked about with respect to the Mormont women, and I think it carries over with the Norries and the other hill clans, is the reason I think we don't see as much practicing of kind of traditional feminine ways or traditional feminine roles among the Mormonts is there's simply not room for it. Every day is a matter of survival. Bear Island life is hard, and I think that's just as, if not more, true in the Northern Mountains. Winter is going to hit hard there. Resources are going to be scarce there. There's no time to kind of have women be, they're too weak, they can't do anything, put them to the side. It's all hands on deck or nobody survives. But with the Norries in particular, and again, I think this is a good comparison to the Mormonts have lived for centuries with this idea of, any day the Ironborn can come, they will kill, and they will take you off into slavery. Mm-hmm. So you have to know how to fight because you're going to have to do it eventually. With the Norries, I think the Norries live closest to the gift, and even though the Night's Watch was at a greater strength at this point than we see it in the main novels, it's still, I think wildling raids were still a thing. There's still this fear that wildlings are going to come in, and we know that there's precedent for wildlings carrying off these southern women and taking them beyond the wall. So I could see where there was this thought among the Norries of, we're going to train women to know how to fight back, because you never know when a wildling is going to come and carry you off. You have to be able to defend yourself.
Right on.
And, the way that Cregan, obviously he falls in love with Aly Blackwood, and he likes her specifically because, as he says, she smells of wood smoke, not of flowers. She's this warrior. She can defend herself. She stands up for herself. He likes Baela when she defends the men who, saved her from Aegon II. He takes out a sword and says, you're not over my dead body, or you're going to arrest them. And he likes this. He smiles at this and says, okay, then you can keep them. I think Cregan liked the idea of a woman who could defend herself, who wasn't afraid to take up a sword and say, I'm gonna fight for what's right. And I think, in a way, Aranori was probably very similar to this.
That's probably our first example in this episode, besides the brief mention of Ned, of something that's definitely likely to happen in the books that we haven't seen yet, is the North arming women to fight, winter and the undead and all that. And it's a good point about Cregan and liking these tough women, because it seems to be the only thing. I
think that is a comparison he has with Ned in some way, and with Lyanna and Arya.
Yes, it's his soft spot.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
it may not be coincidence that her name is Ara, which sounds a lot like Arya.
Yeah.
Coincidence? I don't know.
And as we'll see later, he has a daughter named Rhea, which is Arya, an anagram for Arya, and also happens to be one of George's assistants.
Yeah, and Rhea Golden is the person who's doing the art for that new Starport graphic novel, and that's who Rhea Stark is named after.
That's right.
Very fun little fact.
So there's Ara and Arya and Rhea and all these little versions of that kind of similar name there.
Now you're going to have Arallels.
Yeah, Arallels! Oh my god, nice. That's true, we are going to have Arallels. So let's see, moving on, we have... of course, a key factor in the Dance of the Dragons was loyalty to either Rhaenyra or Aegon II. And a lot of that loyalty was based on whether, the prior lords had knelt to Rhaenyra at the Great Council so long ago. Now, so many of these lords had died out because that was, 106? I don't remember the date, but I think it was 106-ish. And the dance didn't break out till 23-ish years later.
105.
105, okay, close enough. So 24 years later. And that by then, a lot of those lords and ladies had died off, so they felt that their pledge wasn't, they didn't have to abide by their father or mother's pledge. But Lord Cregan, he was in a position of power, being a high lord, and he was able to use that a bit for bargaining, I could say, as well as... for positioning his house for future gain as well. But let's take a few questions that came up in between that before we move on to the Pact of Ice and Fire. From anime lover Nicole, I have a direwolf question. Did the Starks own direwolves before they died out below the wall? Your thoughts? Good question. I don't know about regularly, but there's probably been some.
Yeah, they've got, kennels.
Yeah, the direwolf kennels, yeah.
I don't know.
No, they probably did. No, that makes sense. They do have... I wonder if they would tame direwolves back in the day without skin changing, and the occasional skin changing may have happened.
Yeah, I wonder if it ever happened to someone who wasn't a skin changer, or maybe, I still think that even if they weren't full on, that they still had some little bit of a connection to them that would have made it easier.
Yeah. What do you think, Nina?
Because I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, obviously direwolves are pretty rare now. So that's one question, is how common were direwolves ever that this would even have been an option? But two, I think it was probably, for me, I would think it only probably would have happened if there was that skin changer connection. Because, direwolves are huge, first of all, and they're obviously pretty fierce. So it's not, all the trouble of kind of trying to tame a regular wolf, and then on top of that, you've got, a much bigger animal. So if there's a skin changer connection, maybe, but I wouldn't say it was any kind of regularity.
Yeah,
I will say that Gregory Nemeth points out in the chat, why would it be their sigil if they didn't? And maybe there was long past, a particular set of Stark that also had direwolves, but it wasn't, like you said, regular enough, but that it was known that they had done that before.
Well, we have a lot of animal sigils on.
Yeah,
houses.
it's true, but I mean, the Lannisters owned lions.
Yeah,
to be
it's true.
fair.
There is usually some sort of connection.
Yeah, there
to
is
the
some
animal,
sort
but
of
it doesn't have to be
connection.
skin changing, I suppose.
No.
Broken King asks, how do you see Aegon III as a person? For me, he was one of the most interesting and well-written figures of Fire and Blood. Yes, I think we're going to mostly focus on him. He's going to get his own episode, basically. So we'll save a lot of the greater detail for that. But I do agree. I think he's really interesting, and it's also worth mentioning in terms of Cregan Stark. Cregan pushed at least one or two things that Aegon didn't want him to do, and Cregan listened, which was unlike a lot of the other regents, as tough and as overbearing as Cregan was. He actually listened to the king, unlike, say, Unwin Peake and some of these other characters. Well, saying Unwin didn't listen is an understatement. but yeah.
Obviously, I will know even more about Aegon as a person when Fire and Blood Part 2 comes out.
Yes.
So there is that. But in terms of him as a child and a teen, I really think he's such an interesting character just because of the depression and PTSD that he's battling that they show there. And I don't think George makes it crazy overt or anything like that. Like, you don't see the full extent, but it makes you wonder about, what sort of night terrors he really probably had. And it was probably even more extreme than we see in Fire and Blood, I would guess.
Yeah, you're probably right. I mean, at some point he seems to maybe get over it because, we read about how he's just like, no, he doesn't even want the egg. He doesn't even want Viserys' egg around. And later he does actually apparently try to hatch the dragon. So he clearly changes his mind over time. But it's a really interesting idea to have a dragon king who's traumatized by dragons. That's just a cool, concept for a plot element, So yeah, I like that a lot. Stephen Stark says, Super Chat is 666 for a shade because she is the best. You can't have any, Aziz. This is for the queen.
Yeah.
All right, well, I can't argue with that.
Give me $6. Well, probably not 66 cents because Google takes their cut.
You win this round. From Stannis Baratheon, interesting. From Stannis is asking, could Cregan truly take Storm's End, Hightower, and the Rock? How could he even accomplish such a feat?
I just want to say how much I'm cracking up just at the idea of actually Stannis Baratheon, him thinking about this and asking his maester, could Cregan Stark do this?
Yeah, this is 12-year-old Stannis asking. He's doubting his. That's exactly. Maester Crescent was telling him this. He's like, Cregan couldn't have taken. I don't know that he could have. I mean, maybe he could have over a long time. Storm's End has never been taken, really. Hightower, not that we know. I mean, Old Town's been invaded before, but I'm not sure that the Hightower's been taken. The Rock certainly hasn't. So I have my doubts. I definitely have my doubts, but he was definitely game to try. It seems like I believe him when he was saying he was willing to try. So. What do you think, Nina? Do you think that was just talk? Was he just trying to be
No, I think he was genuine. I think he genuinely meant to do it. Did he think he could win? I have no idea. But I think it didn't matter to him. I think that it was a sort of thing of if we die, then we die, but we're gonna die doing it.
Yeah, and he's 21, so it's possible. Just like we saw with Ned's army, or rather Rob's army, when it's marching down the neck, and they see the twins. And Great John Umber and Roose Bolton and all these guys just look at the defenses and they're kind of stunned and they think, oh man, we're not going to. And it's kind of like, wow, have these guys really not seen the twins before? And I guess maybe not. It's possible they hadn't. It's possible they took a different route when they were going to King's Landing to fight in the rebellion and they haven't really been there any other time. It's entirely possible. Cregan, being 21 at this point, almost certainly wasn't around, or is he 20? Not 21, 23-ish, whatever. No, he is 21. Yeah, so at the beginning of the dance. So during the Hour of the Wolf, he's 23, 24. That's what I was thinking of. Anyway, so that...
young.
Yeah, very young. He almost certainly hadn't seen the South. He doesn't necessarily know Casterly Rock is,
wild to think to me that when he was Hand of the King during the Hour of the Wolf, he was younger than I am. And it's just when you think about it also Ned Stark, I often think of him as so old because of Game of Thrones, because of Sean Bean, but when you actually think about his age, he's 36, when he dies, which is younger than you. It's just crazy.
It is. That's the age Aegon III dies, and we think of him as having a long life because he became king, but he died at 36. He had a bunch of kids. He was king, but 36 of tuberculosis too, of all things. Yeah. Which, by the way, is unusual that we have a Targaryen dying of kind of a regular sounding disease. But it's also right at the beginning of the magic dropping off period, so maybe that's related. It's also not really on topic, so we'll move on. So the Pact. Let's talk about the Pact. Now, this is, of course, when you use the word Pact and the word ice and fire in the same sentence, it's like, whoa, that's like a whole bunch of different theories you're referencing all at once there, buddy. So it definitely sets off some alarm bells, and of course, indeed, it does have a lot of parallels. It starts with Jacaerys Velaryon coming up, flying north. He stops off in White Harbor and then heads to Winterfell. The deal, officially, is that Cregan's son Rickon is going to marry an as-yet unborn daughter of Jacaerys and Baela. And, you know, the term, what do you use a term like that for? That's another way we can phrase this you know, promise. A princess that was promised. A prince that was promised. Hello. Okay, so we're getting somewhere here. But the unofficial version told by Mushroom is that Jace Jacaerys fell in love with a girl named Sarra Snow, who is supposedly Cregan Stark's bastard sister. Bastard sister. Hello, maybe not bastard in terms of Lyanna, but that's definitely gives Lyanna vibes. And that because he slept with her and got married in secret, which, there you go, more R plus L equals J feels, this was kind of amends for doing that, in a sense, that the deal came around because of this. Now, the problem with this theory, or the problem with Mushroom's accounting, is he wasn't there. But it almost doesn't matter if it's true, because George wrote it in there, and it makes us think about all these parallels. So whether or not it really happened is interesting, but regardless, he's wanting us to think of these parallels, this R plus L equals J stuff. It's very foreshadowy. Nina, what do you think about all this? It's quite a lot to drop into one little anecdote.
It is. And it's something that I think is definitely there, even if it didn't happen. And, you know, George R. Martin has said that, you know, he's dropped red herrings as much as he's dropped foreshadowing into Fire and Blood. So even if it didn't happen, I think the intention is definitely to get us to think about this, to think about a Stark Targaryen union and a child being born of that union. Even if, you know, obviously, I don't think personally that this happened, because it doesn't really make a lot of sense is why Jacaerys would agree to marry his daughter to Rickon, its daughter by Baela to Rickon, if he and Cregan both know that he's actually married to Sarah. Like,
they're agreeing to polygamy. Yeah, that's weird.
What's the reveal at this point? Like, oh, by the way, I've actually married someone completely different.
Yeah, it's like elements of both stories can be true, but they cannot both completely be true. They can't
everything be true.
Yeah.
But I think the intention is definitely to get us, and it almost makes more sense from a, I don't know, metatextual perspective if it's not true, because it gets us thinking about, you know, there's kind of unfinished business between the Starks and the Targaryens. There's this kind of unfinished, the marriage that could have been, something that could have been, that's not ever been fulfilled. And then who knows, maybe it's fulfilled later.
That's a very good point. Yeah, so it's this whole promise and this fulfillment, and it might be, we may have this kind of layering of, you know, we like to talk about, and both books and show like to talk about, it's all in where you're standing, whether you're in the north or the south. So we talk about the north and the south contain south of the wall, right? The north is the north. But if you go beyond the wall, that's the real north. And that's where some of these parallels get even more interesting, with the whole idea that there's a promise. Now, what do you think of this very old theory that's been around for a long time, that the whole concept of the prince that was promised, or princess that was promised, relates to some sort of pact, again, the pact between the first men and the children, relates to something like a promised marriage or sacrifice or something along those lines, some sort of person of royal blood being promised, and perhaps that's why the others have come back, because the promise was never fulfilled. It's an old idea, been around for a while, and I think this is probably the best time to discuss it. So, Nina, what do you think about all that? It's a lot to talk about all this, but let's get your first thoughts.
Does she sound fine for you?
I don't know. I couldn't hear you.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yes? Yeah, you dropped out.
Yeah, you're just a little quieter. I wonder if your microphone cord got a little weird.
Can you hear me okay
try
now?
replugging your mic in.
Yeah.
Let me see.
If you guys in the audience can hear her okay, please let us know. It is technically possible that it's bad on our end and not for.
Can you hear me okay now? Maybe.
It says that everybody else says they can hear you fine. So go ahead.
It's definitely on our end, but
So who knows? What I was thinking in terms of the prince that was promised is, the way I've always read that is kind of it's sort of promised, like the prophecy promises it that everything will be bad, but we promise things will be okay eventually. We promise eventually someone will come to fix when there's this kind of eschatological crisis happening. So that being said, obviously there's a thought. Obviously, there's some thought that it has to be someone of House Targaryen. So there's some thought that there is importance to the bloodline of this person. So to the extent that a marriage itself was promised as well, I mean, that's kind of a give and go going with anything of royal blood. So yeah, who's to say?
Right on. Yeah, that's well said. Even though we probably missed the beginning, that seems to have been on our end. We fixed it. So no worries. Nothing, you're all fine.
Yeah.
So it's like everybody got to hear the first part of that, but us. So anyway, we'll hear it later.
And you'll never know.
We'll never know. So okay, so it's great because there's so many of these. There's so many references to royal blood having power and promises, and it's really juicy theorizing territory, and the parallels are unmistakable, I think, and there's quite a few of them. So even this whole term, the Hour of the Wolf, to me sounds like a very similar phrase to A Time for Wolves, which was the original planned Book 7 title, right? I mean, he decided that title was too spoilery. It gives away too much. Like, the Starks are going to come back and have a win. Sorry, so he changed it to A Dream for Spring, which still kind of sounds like a win, but that does sound more bittersweet because it's like a dream of spring. It doesn't mean we actually get it. So anyway, but that's also getting ahead of ourselves. Speaking of winter and the lack of spring, this campaign, this northern commitment kind of plays out in two ways. Cregan stays in the north for a good 2 more years while winter continues to rage and he gathers up his troops. But a pretty substantial amount of soldiers, I think it's about 8,000, led by Roderick Dustin, called the Winter Wolves, head south immediately. So there is a northern contribution right off the bat. And these are mostly older men. These are the guys who were even more ready to die than the Second Sons and other crazy Northerners. So it's kind of like what we see in Game of Thrones, where Robb rushes south without his full strength because he doesn't have time to wait for everybody. And we find out later there's quite a few more men in the north if he had the time. And again, it's these men that we're talking about, the Norries. You mentioned it's his former wife, Cregan, after she dies. Those are the Hill clans. Those are the ones that stay behind from Robb because he doesn't have time to get them. It makes sense that Cregan would not leave them out because he's married to them. Yeah. So Nina, what do you think about this whole marshaling process? This is more of a quick question. What do you think about this marshaling process, and what do you think some of these difficulties were for having to do that during this really crazy winter?
Well, and that's the thing, because winter officially arrives in the middle of the Dance of Dragons. So even before that, you have to expect that the North was kind of getting into preparing for winter mode. We don't know. I don't know that we know exactly how long the autumn was before this, but or even the summer before that, but how much time the Starks and the whole of the North actually had to prepare for this. Now Cregan is thinking, if he's meeting with Jacaerys in late autumn, he's thinking in the back of his mind, now I have to, and this is kind of getting a little ahead, but the Pact of Ice and Fire is a speculative game for the Starks because they're not getting this marriage until years and years and years in the future, if ever, which obviously it doesn't happen. But Cregan has to marshal men today for it. He's has to fight, obviously he doesn't leave for a couple of years, but the Dance of Dragons is happening right now. So he has to gather his men, he has to provision them, he has to provide gold for them. And he's thinking in the back of his mind, winter is coming / winter is here. I have to make sure that the North can survive and has enough to survive so that even if I take the Second Sons, even if I take the kind of lesser men, they've still got to survive. There's got to be enough for everybody to continue surviving. So I can see why he kind of waited and stayed back. And Roderick Dustin as well is farther to the south physically. So he's a little more able to kind of say, all right, I'm going to gather kind of my local graybeards, or sort of the local, the more immediate forces and go south, versus Cregan, who has to kind of reach all of the tendrils of the north and gather everyone to kind of come south.
And like you said, of course, because of winter, it makes it's longer for the messages to get to these places, longer for them to respond and march, and then it takes longer to get there. But yeah, it's a good point about the location of Barrington too. That makes a difference. It's kind of neat to think about this. Like, it's a really odd mindset to get into, but if you're trying to think about how these Northerners behave, it's like they grow up expecting maybe to just die in winter, and they're like, oh, actually, we get a chance to die in battle? Heck yeah, that's so much better. They're like excited. This is like, it counts as like getting lucky. This is luck for the Northerners. So let's move on to the next phase here. That's some good setup for the Pact of Ice and Fire. Now we get into a little bit of the action in the south that leads to the Hour of the Wolf. We have the northern action. We have the southern action. Of course, between all this, the Dance of the Dragons actually plays out. We're obviously skipping over all of the main action of the dance. We're skipping over the Winter Wolves being really brave, but getting essentially entirely wiped out. Like, really brave, but also, yeah, they accomplished their mission of dying in the south pretty bravely, pretty effectively. That story of Roderick Dustin fighting those high towers is like, it's crazy. Like, wow, but it's pretty awesome. Got it.
Earned that nickname.
He did, yes, Roddy the Ruin, indeed. Fighting with a missing arm. Yeah, that does seem like a ruined man. Yeah, but he went out like a badass. So, to layer on the parallel names, the main thematic Song of Ice and Fire type names, we have the False Dawn. I mean, wow. that's another one that's just right on the nose there. Pact of Ice and Fire, False Dawn, yeah, Hour of the Wolf. These are just, the subtext here is really powerful. So what's happening with the False Dawn is we have this Riverlord host defeats Boros Baratheon's army at the Battle of the King's Road, which is nicknamed the Muddy Mess. All these battles have like great official names and great nicknames. It's cool. We have, like, what is it? The Fish Feed was that other one, and
that's the battle by the lake shore.
Yeah, so many great battle nicknames. And we have, with speaking of names and outstanding names, we have the Muppet Tullys getting involved here, which it's just really hard to take them seriously.
Well, he really doubles down in Fire and Blood with them, because he doesn't just add Oscar Tully. He also emphasizes that Kermit Tully was green as summergrass, and Oscar was even greener. It's like, really?
Oh man, yeah. Because people that came up obviously in World of Ice and Fire, and people were like, "What?" And so he's like, "No, we're going more. We're going more Muppets."
200% Muppets.
200%. So right after this battle ends, which is a victory for the Riverlanders or the combined Riverlands force, which is they're on the side of the Blacks. The Greens are not done, but they have no armies anywhere near. And but for some reason Aegon II is like, yeah, no, so so what that all my armies are gone, basically. Go cut my brother's ear off. And they're like, well, actually, maybe you should surrender. Maybe you should take the black, brah. And he's like, no, cut my brother's ear off. And so they poison him.
And make sure to dismember Bela in the process.
Yeah, right. Yeah, let's not forget about, and also, let's kill some other cousins or maim some other cousins while we're at it. So the Sea Snake, who, it's interesting because we have the Sea Snake and the what's his face, the Clubfoot, who both of them switch sides multiple times, but the Sea Snake does it for kind of good reasons, whereas the Clubfoot does it for kind of who knows why. He's just a real mystery. But from Cregan's point of view, he doesn't have all of our information, where the Sea Snake seems to have good reasons for changing sides. He just sees this guy has a name like Sea Snake, and he changes sides a lot. So that seems pretty straightforward to him. He's like, no, this guy is dishonest. Like, he can't be trusted. But nevertheless, Aegon II is dead. They poison him, and they have to, do a few other arrests and clean up because of the other members of his faction. But basically, they're trying to present it as the Greens are done. And we have a quote here. I'll read this here. The corpse of King Aegon II was consigned to the flames in the hopes that all the ills and hatreds of his reign might be burned away with his remains. Thousands climbed Aegon's high hill to hear Prince Aegon proclaim that peace was at hand. A lavish coronation was planned for the boy, to be followed by his wedding to the Princess Jaehaera. A cloud of ravens rose from the Red Keep, summoning the Poisoned King's remaining loyalists in Old Town, the Reach, Casterly Rock, and Storm's End to King's Landing to do homage to their new monarch. Safe conducts were given, full pardons promised. The realm's new rulers found themselves divided on the question of what to do with the Dowager Queen Alysanne, but elsewise all seemed in accord, and good fellowship reigned for the best part of a fortnight. And then Cregan's like, no. None of that's going to happen if I have any say of it, except for the whole new king. He was okay with the new king bit. But the rest, he's like, full pardons? I don't think so. He's against a lot of this. He's against this in accord. And he has a point, I think. They were a little premature. The Hightowers were still active, basically. And there were, apparently some other unnamed lords that were still flying Aegon's golden banner. So maybe Cregan has a bit of a point here. Corlys was like, no, anything. Peace at all costs. Which, peace at all costs is kind of a noble position to take. But maybe the war wasn't truly done. What do you think, Nina? Was Corlys being a little premature, or was that the right attitude to take, or did Cregan have the right of it?
Well, I think that Corlys throughout the dance, whether he was backing Rhaenyra or whether, when he had switched over to Aegon II, Corlys's point was really, once it's kind of been established that we're on the winning side, let's talk about peace. Let's end it. Let's end the hostilities. We see this when he's counseling Rhaenyra when she takes King's Landing. What he advises her to do, offer pardons to the Baratheons, offer pardons to the Hightowers, offer pardons to the Lannisters, and as long as they bend the knee to you, say everything is done, marry Aegon and Jaehaera, everything is done. Rhaenyra says, absolutely not. My brothers are still in the field. I'm not going to give this up until, they are all dead. We know what happens to Rhaenyra, but eventually Corlys switches sides. He supports Aegon II, and he says the same thing to him. He says, look, you've got these armies coming. You've got every side is against you, basically. You have no army anymore. The best thing for you to do is to offer a general pardon to anyone who's sort of supporting the Black faction, make Aegon your heir, marry him to Jaehaera. It's about peace. He's not wrong. The realm had suffered very grievously during the dance. And, as we see under Aegon III, it takes a very, very, very long time for the realm to recover for this. So Corlys isn't wrong to want peace, and he's not wrong to want peace as soon as he can get it. That being said, and, it looks very dominant that you've got this River Lord force who's obviously supporting Rhaenyra and now Aegon III. You've got the Vale force who's coming in with Leowyn and Corwyn Corbray. They're obviously supporting the Aegon III. So it looks very dominating in terms of Black sport. And obviously you've got Alan Valerian out at Driftmark with his ships. But as you pointed out, Lionel Hightower, when he gets the offer, says, absolutely not. I'm not making peace. You killed my father. I'm going to come after you. I'm going to hold out. Corlys can't know this at this point. He can't know the feelings of Johanna Lannister and Elenda Baratheon, which we'll get into. But for all he knows, they could very easily say, you killed our husbands. We're not going to surrender. And Elenda still has Jaehaera at Storm's End. So he could very easily set her up as sort of the queen in Storm's End. And what are you going to do? Take Storm's End?
Yeah.
It is a good sentiment to want peace. And I think Corlys is ultimately kind of proved right. But at the same time, I think what Cregan did was kind of necessary in terms of, we really need to hammer out a lasting piece rather than a kind of illusory piece.
Yeah, so it's not so I think some people say that Cregan was maybe being a little warlike, but I don't necessarily think that's true. I mean, he was being warlike, but it wasn't just like the Northerners, like they want to come down and die. It wasn't that simple. They did want to come down and die, but Cregan's in the right, at least partly, that yeah, a lasting peace is a good thing, but a fake peace is no good. So yeah, it's a tricky kind of balance. Good point.
What's the quote from a Game of Thrones? It's no use kind of hammering your sword into a plowshare if you're going to hammer it back into the sword tomorrow.
Yes, very, very true. Yeah, that's a great point. A good reference there. Okay, so let's talk about why Cregan came south. There's a couple of more obvious reasons, but there's probably some other motives as well. And we're going to also talk about these characters that you mentioned, Elenda and Johanna and some of the others as well in just a minute too. So we've got a lot of these characters profiled for today. Like you said earlier, the Pact was not, Cregan wasn't getting his part of the deal right away. In fact, it was maybe not deliverable because we're talking about a kid that hadn't even been born yet. And
two parents who weren't even married at that point.
Right, yeah, like it's really, like you said, speculative is the perfect word for that. It's a promise, but it isn't a promise that can necessarily be kept because they can't control all the elements of it. So, on the surface, how familiar does this sound? A Stark Lord coming down from the north to be Hand of the King, with one of his main motivations being to figure out what happened with regards to a certain poisoning. Now, in this case, it's the poisoning of a king. In Ned Stark's case, it was the poisoning of the Hand of the King. But you got a lot of familiar things there. Now, Ned and Cregan are pretty different in a lot of ways, but they're both not exactly what you would call politically savvy, or at least politically, like, in their element. Politics isn't their element. Being at court is not their natural preferred place. Cregan got out of there as fast as he could. Ned didn't want to go in the first place. Remember, book and show kind of confuse us sometimes, but in the books, Ned's like, I don't know. But he also figured it was his only way to figure out what happened to Jon Arryn. If he didn't go, he was never going to learn that. As it turns out, he still didn't ever learn that. But he went to his grave with the wrong impression on that regard. But Cregan didn't. Cregan really seems to have gotten the right story as to who poisoned Aegon II, although he really cast kind of a wide net there, I think.
Absolutely.
He really had a lot of people executed or whatever done to them, punished for this, and I think he was a little unfair. Some of his judgments were a little arbitrary, but that's up for debate. Now, there's, as far as other reasons why he came down. Of course, to make sure this promise was fulfilled, he still couldn't make that happen right away because, obviously, as we said, all the elements weren't in place yet. But he probably / maybe wanted to, remind them of that and keep that promise in everybody's mind so that it would not be forgotten later. And if they all get the idea that he's a big, tough, mean guy, well, that's going to make them a lot less likely to break a promise to him, right? It just kind of, think of who they're dealing with here. He establishes who he is. So I think there's a lot of importance there. But the stated goal is high treason was committed. Poisoning the king is wrong. What do you think of that? I think, to me, Nina, him making such a big deal out of poisoning the king is a little kind of suspicious to me, because I don't know about you, but I thought a lot of his judgments were a little arbitrary, and because some of them were arbitrary, it might mean that there were some ulterior motives in play here. What do you think about that?
Well, I think again, I see him. It's not a one-for-one parallel, but I think that I think we can see a little bit of shades of Stannis in there with Cregan, and I think with Cregan, even though he's obviously thinking, he's obviously kind of a pro-Black supporter and he's supporting Aegon III, I think he has this very solid idea in his mind that, like, you don't poison the king. You don't do that. I don't care, if it were a battle, sure, I would kill him myself. But, poison, that's a craven's way to go. That's an underhanded way to go. I think that really offended him. He was a usurper and he was fighting for the wrong side, but he was still a crowned and anointed king. You don't poison him. So I think that was something that I think his initial reason for coming south, Gildayn talks about this, that Cregan and his men were kind of looking, not necessarily to die, but they were looking to kind of bring battle, and they didn't particularly mind if they died because, winter is here. That's what you do. If winter is in the north and there's hardship in the north, you go south and you try and find battle. And if you die in battle, well, it's a better death than starvation. So I don't think Cregan minded bringing battle, but I think when he kind of came to King's Landing and kind of realized like, oh, wait, you're going to build this new regime on poisoning the old king and everyone's just kind of going to move past, like, that's fine. No. We're going to take care of this right now before we do anything else.
Yeah, well said. And to back this up a little, to give this kind of more color to this northern attitude, you're right. It's a lot of it is about, I think if we can try to simplify it a little bit, it's about strength. The North they have to be strong. We talked about how the women have to be strong because there's no time for, it's all hands on deck situation. It's be strong or die. Yeah. And so that's just kind of in the forefront of his mind at all times. It's like, that's how you prove that you're worthy of being king, is by proving your strength. So that's how you beat a king, is by proving to everyone that he's not worthy of his throne because he's not strong enough. Poisoning him doesn't prove anything. That doesn't prove he's not strong enough, even if that was already apparent, which I think is kind of a counter-argument. It's like, look, it's already apparent that Aegon II was weak. He wasn't, a powerful king. He didn't have many armies anymore. But Cregan says it's still important that they go through the motions, that honor is maintained for future kings and all that. But it's also kind of funny to me that he cares so much about an anointed king who was anointed in the Seven.
Sure.
Under a religion he doesn't even follow. But to him, it's more about the principle and not about the religion and the gods behind it, I suppose.
Absolutely. Well, and I think again, Cregan wants to see Aegon III on the Iron Throne, but I think there may have well been a concern in his mind that you're going to establish this regime on the poisoning of the old king, and everyone just is going to kind of move past it. That's not a stable regime that's not a stable foundation to build a regime on.
Yeah. So when we ask this question, why did Cregan come south? I want to ask it again with the framework of thinking about parallels and how we talk about, well, what's the North and what's the South? And you think about Beyond the Wall as the real North. Well, think about, why did the others come south? We've asked that question since the beginning. We've talked about referenced promises and things like that.
Is that a new joke? Why did the others go south? Why did the chickens cross the road?
Why did the others cross the wall? Well, last episode we did talk about how mushroom called Sunfire, a great fire-breathing chicken. So we do already have some chickens going on. Why did the chicken cross the narrow sea, or the
narrow sea?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, sure. You come up with the punchline. It's your joke then. Okay.
So this line makes me think of that, especially the way it's written. And George, of course, as we know, is often pretty careful with his writing. And as Nina has pointed out, sometimes it pays to be cautious because he does put red herrings in there. And it feels like he's put the more awareness George gets with how attentive the fandom is, the more red herrings he's going to put in. So I wonder if Fire and Blood is the most red herring-y of all his work so far. And if that's just going to keep increasing until the end. I'm not sure. But anyway, listen to this quote and think of it in terms of the others. Like kind of transpose it, farther north. Others had started this war. Okay, so it starts like that.
That's
Others had started this war.
Others.
Lord Cregan was heard to say, but he meant to finish it, to continue south and destroy all that remained of the Greens who had placed Aegon II on the Iron Throne and fought to keep him there. Just the idea of the Greens, right? It's like destroying nature and kind of like the others kind of just rampaging
the Green Men.
through. What's that?
And the Green Men.
And the Green Men, that's right. And this is right along, right near there with the Isle of Faces, not too far from King's Landing, in the center of the continent there. And regarding the Pact of Ice and Fire again, Nina, we did some research, right? And we figured out that when was the Pact first actually fulfillable?
Well, so it's not actually, it's a little bit of a hard question because we don't know exactly when Cregan, jumping a little bit ahead of ourselves, Cregan obviously marries Aly Blackwood, but after her, he marries Nina Stark, has 4 sons and a daughter with her. It's not entirely clear when those sons were born. My kind of thinking about it is kind of mid-late 140s, maybe into the 150s, but that's just kind of a guess at this point.
I feel the same way.
I kind of think they were of an age with Rickon's daughters, and that's when I kind of assumed that Rickon's daughters were born, but who's to say at this point? In any event, we know that kind of Aegon III doesn't have his first daughter, Dana, until what, 145, I think?
I think that's exactly right.
So,
yes.
You know, it's in that sense, Dana, you know, we're talking 20 years in the future that this is even a possibility, and a possibility of fulfilling a pact for people who were never even, you know, thought of in this pact.
Yeah.
So, you know, obviously he's not going to marry. By the time we're getting to Aegon III's children, Rickon is already probably happily married. So that's not a possibility. Maybe his son's by his third wife. But again, that's getting very, very kind of distant from when the pact was even formed. So it's kind of impossible to kind of fulfill at that point.
Yeah, it may have been possible to fulfill in reverse, like the Stark sending a princess to the Targaryens, because as we know with Aly Blackwood, he has 4 daughters, and we don't really know what happened to them. They presumably just married into other northern houses or something like that. But he didn't have, so there was both sides of this were difficult. He didn't have a son, and they didn't have daughters. So yeah, it just didn't work out.
You know, you compare it to Quentin in A Dance with Dragons. He's trying to fulfill the secret marriage pact between the Martells and the Targaryens that was formed 10 years ago between 2 people who aren't involved. Now imagine Cregan, who's trying to fulfill something 20 years old, made by a prince who's now dead for 2 people who aren't involved. It's really hard to kind of enforce. The more kind of away from the language you get, the harder it is to to enforce that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So they kind of set themselves up a bit. I mean, Cregan, in a sense, maybe Cregan was kind of honor bound to do what he did. He had to take a side, and his father probably bent the knee to the blacks initially. So he probably felt that was his duty, but may as well try to get something out of the bargain. He may as well try to get some promises out of it. If he's going to say yes eventually, he may as well try to get them to give something in return. That's one way I look at it, just in the different ways turning this over in my head. I thought maybe that was a possibility. So turning back to the Northerners themselves, a couple of things I noticed that were interesting. George is really intent on talking about this whole concept of the Northerners coming south and, you know, rather than dying in the snow. And that's something that we all wonder about in A Song of Ice and Fire proper, how that's going to happen, whether they're just going to be trapped up there or whether there's going to be migrations to the south and what that's going to mean. Are people migrating from the north, fleeing the others? Are they going to also be bringing all sorts of diseases with them, like maybe grayscale, or at the very least, they're going to probably be starving, and there might be, we're dealing with, you know, refugee populations, stuff like that. And so they won't all just be warriors pouring out of the north. That might be one major difference. But either way, it's a pretty big deal. And we wonder just how much strength the North is going to have left, too. That's a good question. Because during the dance here, there's the North, you know, as far as we know, hadn't had any major wars to deal with, so they were relatively full strength. But here, in A Song of Ice and Fire, the North is heavily depleted, and they're not done being depleted because there's still campaigning going on in the North. What do you think is some parallels we can draw with that in mind, given the vast difference in military strength between the two sides? And the status of these men, rather than coming out as a last way to die, versus them being refugees. There's still some parallels there, but I guess there's some also important differences. What do you think about that?
So wait, I'm sorry. I kind of
It's a very long question there, yeah. The idea being comparing potential refugee populations from the north as the others come versus soldiers leaving in advance of winter in order to find a more honorable way to die. It's sort of a similar idea. People leaving the North because the North is being the North.
Well, it's interesting too, because you see there's going to be sort of centers of where people are gathering. So we see this even in the North, in A Dance with Dragons, we see people are gathering in White Harbor. You know, there's a lot of people who are coming here because it's a large city, or the only city in the North. It's got a lot of resources. It's got a lot of, you know, it's got more room and more people to take care of people when winter actually comes, which of course is going to be very bad on White Harbor because it's not designed to take care of that many people. So in an interesting way, I think, you know, on the one hand, we will see people kind of leaving and kind of going away from the others as they advance. On the other hand, I do wonder to what sense Winterfell will be kind of a heart, or where people will gather in terms of, you know, fighting. I don't know. Again, I don't ascribe too much in terms of, secret weapon under Winterfell, whatever. I don't have a strong opinion on that. But I think that as a symbolic place and as a place where all the Starks would be looking to gather, I think that Winterfell could in a way become a place where it's sort of a reverse migration, that everyone's sort of leaving Winterfell
yes.
during the dance, but everyone's kind of going to converge on Winterfell as sort of this base when the others actually arrive.
And it makes so much sense, obviously, not just because it's the capital and the Stark's castle and all that. It's got the warmth, in
sure,
it. So,
the natural hot springs are going to be a place. And of course, it's a historical tradition as well. The winter town has been established to help people during winter. That's where people come so that they don't starve and die during winter.
So there's another really big feels like the others type of moment here if you look at it a certain way, which is that what we have here is this Stark host that is bigger than anything else. There's one quote here, how people are kind of afraid of it, and it's described as savage. In fact, the word savage comes up quite a bit. I think it's like a masterly bias, but anyway. A host twice as large as those the lads had led, and with a fearsome repute. So the lads, meaning the army that they led after the muddy mess. So there, of course, it was an even larger army before their battle. But think of it this way. You've got this large, scary army coming out of the north, and pretty much nobody else has an army anywhere nearby. Because they've all killed each other. How does that not describe Game of Thrones perfectly? You got the South just tearing itself apart in war, and then here comes the others out of the North after everyone's shredded themselves. It feels really similar to that. So that's part of why I just think it's just awesome and fun, and we're looking. It makes it so worthwhile for hunting for more parallels. Yeah, whenever I see like one or two parallels, it's like what? Wait, there's got to be more.
The vein of parallels just come.
Yes, it's where there's smoke, there's fire, and more parallels. Ooh, special delivery for Ashay. Look at that.
Not for Aziz.
Not for me. See, I don't get Steven's money.
Oh, shut up.
Okay, so yes, Ashay gets a live milkshake delivery here. Because she's special.
This is a smoothie.
That's a smoothie? Oh, yes. That's much better. I'm so sorry. I have maligned your beverage.
Yeah, I was like, what are you talking about?
You are far more likely to have a smoothie than a milkshake.
Say, if there's live milkshake delivery, I should be getting
Okay, so we have also a mention of, it's always important whenever we're talking about the North and the South, the connectors between North and South. One of our favorite houses, the Manderleys. And they're not portrayed as savages, and that's part of where this whole savage idea comes from a little bit. Like, people already kind of see the Northerners that way. But in the dance, a lot of what people see from the North is the Manderleys, especially in King's Landing. So that's kind of their image of the North. And then they get the Cregan and the mountain clans and these quote-unquote real Northerners, and they're like, oh, that's different. It says, in their mail shirts and shaggy fur cloaks, their features hidden behind thick tangles of beard, they swaggered through the city like so many armored bears. Armored bears, I love that.
Yeah.
And of course, again, this is where you have these comments of savages and talking about them worshiping trees, and they're just kind of walking all through King's Landing, doing whatever they want. And again, that's kind of seems like maybe that's going to happen with the real Northerners, the ones beyond the wall. Yeah, we also have even Daemon Blackfire says something like that, doesn't he? It's kind of a recurring theme that also comes up in A Song of Ice and Fire, but isn't fully explored as like a problem, which is the real, when you really get into the weeds of what the South thinks of the North in terms of religion and vice versa. They kind of make fun of each other, but we've never seen like someone like start a fist fight because of one guy likes the old gods and the other guy's like, nah, the warrior, blah, nah, the crone. So it's not something that people like go get super bitter about, but I'm not sure that maybe we're going to see more of that. I think there's going to be bound to be more religious upheaval and A Song of Ice and Fire in the Winds of Winter going forward as well. But yeah. I'm getting a little off topic here. Let's talk about some.
Oh, quick thing. One thing. Nina, if you could just turn your sound down just a tiny bit, that would be great for us.
Okay.
Because I can hear just a tiny bit of echo every so often. It's been a little bothering me.
Is that a little bit better?
I'll let you know. It's when Aziz
Okay.
is talking that I can hear just sometimes like a word of Aziz.
Oh yeah, I'm
in
like
there.
echoing through or something.
Yeah, just a tiny bit. Cool, thanks.
So LML asks,
Oh.
what would Ned do?
What would Cregan have done?
Would Cregan done Ned's position? I got it backwards.
Better, I think. Wouldn't have lost to Cersei, maybe. And that people had a bit of a chat about that in our chat about Cregan in Ned's position. It's funny because Cregan's so much younger too, and
yes.
I really do think he would have. I mean, literally killed it, because he wouldn't have stood for any of that.
Yeah, I agree.
He would have told Robert. He would have. He just would have had. I don't think he would have given Cersei an out.
I kind of agree with that. On the other hand, it's important to remember not that Ned necessarily would have behaved differently if he had an army at his back, but Cregan had an army at his back, and that's a huge difference. I'm not sure that Ned would have like pushed people around with his army, but Cregan did. And if Cregan didn't have an army, I think not a pretty good chance he still would have behaved the same. It just seems like his personality, but we should keep that in mind. That he had an army at his back. Yeah, it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah. We also got another super chat here from Acre Frey.
It's time for you to have your initiation.
Irish wristwatch.
Oh, God.
3 times.
Irish wristwatch times 3.
You said it so slowly.
This is already a problem. I already have a speech impediment, so this is like asking me run hurdles and also be blindfolded doing it.
Just go I already slow can't do it. Be.
This is not easier.
Okay, well, you don't have to.
No, she has to. You just gotta say. You just gotta the trick is to do Irish wristwatch.
Or perhaps you would prefer a different culture's wristwatch. Maybe you could do Russian wristwatch. Polish wristwatch.
Wristwatch. Yeah, I can't say that. I concede defeat.
Well, and watches really didn't exist during the Hour of the Wolf anyway. They have their own phrase. I mean, imagine a watch that says Hour of the Wolf, Hour of the Owl.
How would you even fit all of this?
That's what it's saying. Like, that can't fit on a watch.
It would just be the
half past wolf, I guess.
Yeah, it would just be a little
wolf.
Half past wolf.
The Hour of the Direwolf is longer than the Hour of the Wolf.
Just slightly longer.
Acre Frey said she can stop Scotch if she prefers.
Stop. I don't know about that either. That one's so hard. Okay, let's take our mid-roll break, and we'll come back with Sarra Lives also. Let's do that. So let's say thank you to our Blood Riders. That includes Vorsaki, wielder of a Valyrian steel airac with a dragonbone hilt, Kohalkoi, called Sunpiercer, wielder of a dragonbone bow, and Kokavo the Tamer, wielder of the Wildfire Whip Gehenna. We also would like to say thanks to, let's see, whose turn is it this time? I believe it is time for the Ironborn Captains. That includes Black Matos Stormrider, captain of the Rusted Hinge, Oisan the Wanderer, captain of Naga's Living Flame, Sir Selvas Redblade of White Harbor, captain of Trident of the North, Lord Chucklaws, captain of the Dromon Nightblood, destroyer of evil, John Gregor, captain of the Fist of the Drowned God, Sir Kiran of Lonely Light, Scourge of the Sunset Sea, captain of Naga's Breath, a Dromon armed with siphons of wildfire, Aileen, Archer Queen, captain of the Border Collie, Crimson Kate, captain of the Drowned Queen's Vengeance, Jasana the Just, collector of tolls, captain of the Golden Gift, Lord Mitch of House Bailey, captain of Widow's Blood, his heir is Lordling Mason of House Bailey, and Beneath the Gold, a podcast focusing on lesser-known Song of Ice and Fire characters. Check them out. Good show. Okay, let's see here. I don't think I had any other announcements except to say that if you're going through Fire and Blood still, if you haven't finished it, or if you are intending on rereading but can't find the time, I recommend Audible. The audiobook version of it is very strong. I like the reader, Simon Vance. He does a very solid job. And you can get 2 free downloads by going to audible.com through our site History of Westeros and clicking on the link there on the right sidebar. You can get a free trial subscription. And like I said, you get 2 free downloads with that. And if you don't want to keep the subscription, you still get to keep those downloads. So it's a pretty good deal. It's no risk, decent chance for reward there. You might find out you really like it. I'm of course, I'm a big fan of audiobooks myself. I love to do that stuff when I'm walking around doing chores. Listening to audiobooks and podcasts makes all that tedium a lot more entertaining. Okay. That's that for our mid-roll and announcements. Let's talk about some of these other Hour of the Wolf characters. There's a lot of things going on around the realm Of course, during the Hour of the Wolf, it isn't all this action at King's Landing. And a lot of these other characters...
all wolves.
That's right. And a lot of these other characters are... It's important what they're doing because it affects how they agree or disagree with what's happening in King's Landing. Their own political situations, of course, impact how they view Cregan and the Sea Snake and all these other characters. We'll start with Johanna Lannister, which...
A new Lannister we found out about.
Yeah, another one. And, of course, not similar spelling, but not the same as Joanna. This is Johanna with an H in there.
Yes.
It's kind of along the same lines as all those different versions of Sarah. George likes to do that. It makes sense. You know, you got another one that comes up as Donald. Donald. Yeah, a lot of those. But that's pretty realistic. So she is the daughter of Lord Roland Westerling, who is the widow of Lord Jason, and mother of Lord Lauren, another Lannister name that comes up from time to time, and sister-in-law of Tyland, who, of course, is going to be really important.
I've never heard you say that, I don't think, but like you say it like Tyland, so it just sounds like Thailand to me. I've never thought of it. Thailand, right on. Lannister.
That's funny. Yeah, these things. It's funny how these things. Some of these words you see them written and they're spoken, they take on a whole different meaning because of
Of course, the biggest known one is damp hair and damp hair.
True.
To everyone.
That is one of the biggest ones. Okay, so Nina, tell us about Johanna here. This is you've got a lot of good notes on her.
Well, I love Johanna Lannister, so of course I've got good notes. You know, what I really appreciate about Johanna, so Jason Lannister is killed at the Battle of the Red Fork. Tyland Lannister is in King's Landing when Rhaenyra's forces capture it. He's blinded, mutilated, just really, really, really badly tortured, but left alive. And Johanna is left with 6 children, five daughters, and her little son, who's I think 4 when all of this is, or 4 or 6 when all of this is happening, with the Hour of the Wolf. And she's also dealing with Dalton Greyjoy because, of course, at the beginning of the Dance of Dragons, both the Greens and the Blacks had reached out to Dalton Greyjoy and said, you know, join our side. We'll give you whatever you want and, you know, just, you know, help us. And the Black said, you know, we don't need you on the other side of the continent. We just need you to kind of harry the Westerlands. And Dalton says, hey, that's great for me because I'm a Greyjoy and that's what we do. So Dalton took up for the Blacks and he's been reading in the Westerlands ever since. He sacks Lannisport and he attacks Fair Isle and he attacks Case and he's attacked all of these different places in the Westerlands. And Johanna is quite literally putting out these fires in the Westerlands for her little son. And what I think is really big about Johanna is that, and obviously she gets this message originally from Corlys Velaryon and, you know, bend the knee, acknowledge Aegon III. She could have very easily said, you know, Aegon III, your government, your mother's forces killed my husband. Your mother's torturers completely mutilated my brother-in-law. You sicked the Greyjoys on me. I'm now having to deal with this. Why should I want to do anything for you? I shouldn't want to bend the knee to you at all. I don't want to have anything to do with you. But Johanna doesn't. Johanna says, fine, whatever you want. I will give you back the gold that Tyland, you know, put with us. I will give you some of my daughters as hostages. I will come and bend the knee. I will do whatever you want. Just pardon Tyland and just tell Dalton Greyjoy to get the hell back to the Iron Islands because I need to deal with this. What I think is nice about this is that, you know, not all the time, not uniformly, but oftentimes we get the Lannisters portrayed as being kind of, you know, either villainous or cynically ambitious or cruel people. It's nice to have, even though she's a Lannister by marriage, it's nice to have an example of a Lannister who's actually cares about the Westerlands, who says, I'm going to put aside personal grievances. I'm going to put aside personal vengeances because the Westerlands need me more. They need my attention more than anything I want personally. So I love Johanna.
Yeah, she's really, in a lot of ways, just hearing you explain that, she's a lot of ways, she's the anti-Tywin in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
Like because one of the biggest things here that Tywin would not do, Tywin would probably do some of these things a little similar, like especially the military stuff, he would probably be similarly aggressive about handling. But the pride issue, the idea of like setting aside his personal vengeance, no way. No. He would not, we know he would not do that. So that's a huge differentiator here. And it speaks to one of the things George gets at with the Hour of the Wolf, which that the women, these female leaders, are really vital. And
that's what you're going. That's what you're getting for. Yeah.
You don't hear me disagreeing.
Yeah, that's what you're saying.
Yeah.
The women are the strong ones.
True that. It's true. Like it takes strength to set aside that anger and that need for vengeance. That's hard. Like people say, no, that's a man's need for vengeance. No, that's weak.
Yeah.
Like needing. Like how many people have gotten into like a Facebook argument or a social media fight or just a regular face-to-face fight and argue.
Right
I do that.
Not this one right here. Yeah, that's a personality difference. That's not a gender difference. But it is how we're socialized. It's true.
But like just wasting your time doing that and just realizing like, why did I waste my time doing that? I should have just swallowed my pride
and just bring down the fury of the gods onto them.
Yeah, and it's a lot of it is socialization, and it's like a lot of times men are like, no, we respond by wanting to fight, and that's not, obviously it's not universal, but it's common enough. So I think that's really neat here that we have these characters who have a different set of priorities, but they're not quite as powerful. But you kind of say, wow, if they were in power, these things would be so much different and probably a lot better in a lot of ways. Maybe not in all ways, but in a lot of ways, for sure. So let's move on to the next one. The next character here, Olenna Baratheon. Also very interesting. Nina, tell us about her.
So Olenna Baratheon is the widow of Boros Baratheon. So we knew kind of during the dance that she had 4 daughters with him. Boros leaves for King's Landing while she's pregnant. Boros dies at the Muddy Mess. Forget how many days later it is. It's, very, very short amount of time later. Olenna has a son that she, I think it's funny that Boros suggests he be named after Aegon II. Olenna's like, no, I'm not going to do that.
Nah, sorry, pal.
That's 100% a bad decision. Yeah. So she names him Oliver instead, which is kind of weird because it's supposed to be named after her father, but her father's Royce. So that doesn't make any sense. Anyway, it's weird editing things of Fire and Blood, but she's regent for him, and of course Olenna knows that she hears about the Muddy Mess and she sees the kind of stragglers coming back, and she's smart enough to know that's all the army that I've got is whoever stragglers are coming back from the Muddy Mess. I've got nothing. I've got very strong walls, but I've got nothing else. I don't have an army at this point. And so when she gets this letter from Corlys of, bend the knee, we'll offer you pardons, whatever, Olenna is willing. Olenna says, I'm perfectly willing to do that because she knows if I continue this war, I've got a several-day-old son. This is not going to end well for him. Yeah. I've got 4 daughters. This isn't going to end well for any of them. So, and I don't know. The other thing, and I didn't write this down, but Boros was dealing with the Vulture King in the marches. I don't know. The short side reign of Aegon II mentions that he had victory over the Vulture King, but I don't know to what extent that was still a problem at this point. So Olenna might have also been thinking, that's another fire I have to put out. I don't really have time to devote to continuing to push this cause that is very clearly dead.
That's a good point.
So Olenna says, no, that's fine. I will send 3 of my daughters to you as hostages. I will give you Jaehaera to marry to Aegon III, and I will make my father do homage in my place since, I'm still recovering. So again, it's a way to say that I'm recognizing that this is kind of a lost cause. I'm recognizing that keeping this sake of vengeance open, because again, Olenna has every reason to say, I'm still grieving for Boros. I shouldn't, even though no one should grieve for Boros. No one should grieve for Boros. But she could very well say, I don't need to bend the knee to you. You killed my husband. I shouldn't. I could very well crown Jaehaera myself and kind of set her up as a queen, but she doesn't. She says, I'm willing to agree to peace. So again, we get these women who are very much focused on, I'm willing to have peace as long as, it's an agreeable peace.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
Real quick, so we're about to talk about Samantha Tarly, and something Nina and I talked about before this is the names, we love it when we get new names because it fills out the world and gives you more names to choose from, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But one Alenda, we don't really see that much, so that's an interesting one. But it makes me think of Wenda, well, the White Fawn, which is another, Stormlander name. So I like the consistency and an Enda name, I guess.
Yeah.
But I was trying to think of what other Enda names there were.
It sounds the first part, Ella, makes me think of Lord of the Rings. Makes me think of Elvish.
Oh yeah. There's lots. There's Ella. There's other Ella variant names and Ellens and stuff like that. But I couldn't think of another Elenda. But then we get to the next character we're going to talk about is Samantha Tarly.
Yeah, Samantha.
That really took me out of the story.
Who is daughter of Donald, which is another like these are very very normal like regular like Western names.
Samara or any other. There's so many variants of Samantha you could have anyway. So
I think when I was reading Fire and Blood for the first time and they were talking about Roderick Aaron's children, they had like Amanda Aaron.
Samantha and Amanda. George, are you getting lazy with the names, buddy?
just actually flipping through a baby book this time.
Well, what happened was George is realizing that so many people are naming their kids after his characters that he just wants to like give them some normal options. He's like, well, now you can name your kid Amanda and still have it be a Song of Ice and Fire. You can have it both ways.
Lady Sam Tarly, though, is very awesome.
Yeah, in our document here, it says she is awesome in all caps.
Yes, that's it.
Which is what I wrote.
Yes. So since you wrote that, let's have you continue and tell us why she's so awesome.
She is absolutely kick-ass. So Sam Tarly is
Sam Tarly. That's
she's constantly called Lady Sam.
Yes, she is.
Yeah, that's awesome, Sam Tarly. Yeah,
that was incredibly intentional. Not that they share a lot of actual parallels in terms of personality, but
she's a little braver, slightly braver.
Slightly braver.
Hey, we don't know what exploits Sam's gonna get up to later.
So far, you're right. You're right. She hasn't killed any others, so that we know of.
So, strike one against you, Lady Sam. But no, she's the second wife of Ormond Hightower, which. Again, I just have to point out there are other ways that women can die. The first wife died in childbirth. Just saying, there were other ways you could have killed her off.
We laugh to mask our pain.
I've never heard of another way.
No. But yeah, as Izzy's mentioned, she's the daughter of Donald Tarly and Jane Rowan of Golden Grove, which are both, Black supporting houses. These are both houses that sided for Rhaenyra during the dance. So it's probably unsurprising that Lady Sam, it's not entirely clear when she married Lord Hightower, but it's not entirely surprising that if her father was someone who was saying Rhaenyra always had the right claim, if he was someone who maybe even bent the knee to her or his father did, that she'd be growing up with these ideas of, yeah, totally, Rhaenyra, awesome. But, what we get, at least the account of Mushroom, which, it should always be prefaced like that, Lionel Hightower, who we had mentioned, he's the oldest son of Ormond by his first wife. Lionel is allegedly infatuated with her. He's completely in love with Sam Tarly. Mushroom allows that Sam kind of put off his advances. She wouldn't kind of, do anything with him while Ormond was alive. But, once Ormond died, it was like, well, here you are. But Sam said, I will agree to be with you, but only if you agree to peace. Now, in Mushroom's version, it's Lady Sam saying, I don't want to lose another husband to war. I don't want to, that would break my heart. I have to have you agree to peace. And Lionel was very, very adamant of continuing the war. I think the quote is like he ripped up the paper or something. He was very, very adamant in terms of continuing this, but he agrees to peace. Now, Mushroom's version is because he agrees to it with Lady Sam. Monken's version, which is kind of included in a footnote, is that Lionel may have been influenced by this, but he was also influenced by the fact that his youngest brother Garmund was a page at Highgarden at this point, and that he's obviously foster. Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. He's obviously a foster. He's obviously being treated well. But the truth of any foster is that you are a hostage, and that if something goes wrong, they can and will kill you. So I think that Monken's argument is that Lionel the Tyrells had said, don't raise a host, don't go to war, you can't do anything without our leave. Lionel's fear was that, okay, if I continue and say, no, I'm going to fight for my dead father, I'm going to fight for the memory of Aegon II, the Tyrells would say, all right, off with your head, Garmund Hightower. probably the truth somewhere in the middle. It's probable because we know for a fact that Lionel kept Sam as a paramour for 6 years because the High Septon would not let them marry because this was considered incest.
Yeah, so for people, just in case anyone forgets, there's that amazing anecdote where she says, the High Septon says, you can't set foot in the High Sept.
Yeah.
And she rides a horse in there, which is just so cool. Like, yeah.
I was going to say that is also a very Sam Tarly kind of like our Sam Tarly thing to do because he's always looking at loopholes.
That's
He's
true.
like, the words say this, but you can do this.
Smart.
Good point.
Yeah.
They're both very, very smart.
Yeah,
yes. That's a good point.
But truth probably somewhere in the middle in terms of, being influenced by Sam Tarly while also thinking about Garmund Hightower's safety if he raised another host.
Real quick, we got a couple of notes here. Super chat from Gregory Namuth, who says, "Go Pens, missing hockey for this, way worth it." Well, thanks, Gregory. I wonder if someday the North will invent hockey in Westeros. And from Rebecca Santa, just wanted to say hello to you both. Thanks, Rebecca. Hi back. Okay, so let's move on to we've got a little around 30 minutes-ish left. Let's do our Sarra lives here real quick and have fun with that, and then we'll talk about Cregan's judgments and a bit of aftermath stuff. So, like we said at the beginning, there are so many different ways George has spelled Sarra, and there's these fun pairings with these Sarras. First Sarra is Sarah Snow, who we mentioned earlier. That's the Cregan's half-sister who may have married Jacaerys in secret. And then we have Sarah Stark with 2 R's, who is Cregan and Aly Blackwood's firstborn. So Cregan, I guess, liked to name his kids after his family members. He named his son after his father, and this appears to be his first daughter named after his sister. But the perhaps more interesting parallel is something that Ashea and I and others have talked about many times, is the parallels to Sarra, as in Illyrio's Sarra, to Viscera and Sarah Targaryen. And these parallels grew with the Telling of Fire and Blood. There were several good parallels for that already, but now it became even stronger because we got more detail. So the really strong parallels between those two is that they're both end up in Lys, although they're not from there. They both kind of go there. We're not really sure about Sarra if she's a Blackfire. We're not really sure what her origin is, but she certainly wouldn't have originated in Lys. And of course, Sarah Targaryen, the daughter of Jaehaerys and Alysanne, ran off to Lys. Both of them became sex workers, and both of them ended up becoming really wealthy, so they were very good at it, and also apparently good at some other things, like maybe politics, intrigue, what have you. Whatever it was that got them to rise so high, they did it. And so there's interesting parallels there, especially with their descendants, too, as we have potentially Sarah's descendant, young Griff, is making a claim for the throne. And last week, or was it last week or the week before, when we talked about different claimants for the Great Council, Nina, it was you had done the work on figuring out who all the claimants were. And of course, 3 of those claimants were Sarah's children. And 2 of them had some descriptions, and the third one I guess we didn't get a strong description of, but that was pretty cool. It's kind of like ties all that for full circle. Did I miss any of the parallels there? Was there any between those guys that I missed, or was there anything else to say about Sarah and Sarah?
Not that I can think of.
Okay, cool. All right, that's fun. That's a really cool little neat one there. I like that. I like that parallel. Good job on George's part. Let's move on to the actual judgments and some of these other characters that we haven't talked about yet. So I don't know about you guys, but in my opinion, I think a lot of these judgments on Cregan's part are kind of arbitrary. I don't know that some of this didn't feel like justice to me. The way he just went after every single person that was even remotely connected to Aegon's litter, where he was poisoned, like the litter bearers. Like, what did they have to do with it? I don't know. What do you guys think about that? Do you think it was maybe a little heavy-handed, or maybe it was necessary just to make sure? I don't think it's justice. What's that?
I don't think it's justice. It could be necessary in his mind, or as the smartest choice, or whatever, the safest choice, but it doesn't make it justice.
Yeah, that's a good point. What do you think, Nina?
Well, and the other interesting thing is, for all of this is called the Hour of the Wolf, we don't actually get a lot of these judgments. We don't see Cregan sort of sorting through evidence or, kind of holding trials. It's kind of, the only really mention of that is we get, him dismissing Eustace for lack of evidence, but everyone else is kind of treated as though they're already guilty. So is that maesterly bias? Is it that George R. R. Martin didn't want to take up pages with, going through trials? Is it Cregan? Is it, somewhere in the middle? Who's to say?
Yeah, it's kind of like Ned trying to track down Jon Arryn, who killed Jon Arryn. Those chapters are kind of fun, but Ned is not good at being a detective. So they're not fun for that reason. So you wonder if Cregan is also just like, this is why his judgments were so kind of arbitrary. It's because he also isn't that good at like investigations and such. He just like blames everyone just to make sure he gets the culprit. That's kind of what it feels like a little bit. Yeah, we were given the impression from the prior books, the history books, that Cregan executed a whole bunch of people, but we find out here that he only actually executes 2 people. Because once one guy takes the black, they're all like, oh, we could do that? And so there are all but 2 people take the black, and I guess we have the maester who runs off. But one that kind of annoyed me was Sir Perkin the Flea, who gets pardoned and then is told, nah, you weren't pardoned by me. It's like, wait, what? You're executing these guys because they poisoned the king. But the king is the one who pardoned this guy. So how is that's just arbitrary, man. So, and Orwyle is arrested for not questioning who the poison was for, which also seems kind of sketchy. Like, maesters aren't supposed to question people, especially lords, that ask them for things. So, I don't know. That's all. Even if he had questioned, what would it have mattered? He's like, well, who is this for? Oh, actually, never mind. In that case, since you're asking, I don't want the poison after all. Like, so yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Nina? Let's get your take. You think a lot of this was kind of arbitrary, or?
I think it was kind of. I think Cregan was kind of trying to make a clean sweep. I think he was trying to say, I want this reign to be based on a completely kind of clean slate, and anyone who could possibly be connected to this poisoning, I've got to take them under consideration and ultimately find them guilty, because if there's even one person who's outstanding later who's saying, there is no justice there, and then that becomes a problem later, I can't have that. It's either complete 100% justice done or no justice done at all. Like, it's, I think that's kind of how he approached it.
That's a good point. And it ties in with what we had said before about his view on strength. He's like, well, look, if we had just beaten the king, there would be no doubt. There would be no argument post afterwards or who was more worthy or whether this was done justly or honorably. And so this is kind of, to him, this is like, well, because you guys poisoned the king, this is all fallout from that. This is necessary to correct your dishonor. Of course, that's his opinion, but surely other people agreed, but many people did not. So let's talk about beyond Perkin the Flea, who didn't really have a big role to play here. He was just the first guy to realize that he could take the black, started that whole train. Larry Strong does not take the black, and he has an interesting quote. When was a wolf ever moved by words? I think that's kind of an interesting quote. I don't know if there's a whole lot to read into it, but I feel like maybe there's something there that I haven't figured out. What do you think? You guys think there's anything to that?
I mean, I think that Larys was, it's really interesting to compare, and I don't want to jump ahead too much, but it's interesting to compare Larys and Corlys's reaction, because Larys doesn't offer any defense, but also doesn't admit to it. He just kind of accepts that this is the judgment and figures there's no arguing with Cregan Stark. I'm just going to take whatever he does. Compared to Corlys, which is a completely different story.
Yeah, Corlys is like, no, I did the right thing, man. He's like, because he wants his position to be seen as honorable. I think he wants his position to be seen as, look, pushing for peace is the right thing to do. Like, he was more of the attitude of a lot of these female characters we talked about who put peace first and honor and justice second, which I think is, when we're talking about world war, that's not, I kind of tend to agree.
By the way, I mean, we've seen direwolves moved by words, right? Arya and Sansa have commands for their direwolves,
That's true. Wolves are commands. That's true.
Yeah, technically, I've just,
That's a good point. So, and also, if Larys realized what we've described here, which is that Cregan's attitude is to just wipe this clean slate, then yes, arguing is definitely a waste of time. Cregan's going to do this no matter what. there's no argument's going to change that, because if he's going to pardon one guy, then he has to pardon everybody, because that's the whole point of a clean slate. You can't pick and choose. It has to be everybody. But this is where Aegon III's words do move the wolf. He says, I don't want Corlys killed. And, he's like, well, I'm still going to do it. And this is when Black Aly comes in.
Thank you, Black Aly, for not having Corlys killed.
Yes.
We are grateful.
Even though he didn't live much longer, we're all still very happy with that, I think. And Corlys, again, backing him up, he says, defending his position, that he would do the same thing again. He's like, yeah, I know, even though it's about to get me killed, that he stands by his actions, because peace is just that important. So I think that's cool. So the two people who don't take the black, we'll do that real quick, then we'll do Black Aly Blackwood, are Larry Strong and Giles Rosby. Now, Giles Rosby, to me, this is some Barristan shade here, I think. Because it's a similar situation where you've got these two regimes you've got this end of a long civil war, and Barristan is pardoned by Robert. But this attitude given in this chapter here is that a king's guard shouldn't survive his king. I guess it's also shade for Jaime, even more shade for Jaime, really. But Giles Rosby's an older man, so that's, to me, it seems a little more like Barristan. And of course, Larry Strong is a little, obviously, Varys. I wonder if this is how Varys will meet his end. Just his time runs out and everybody, the game comes up for him. I don't know. What do you think? Is a different end in line for Varys, or maybe...
Varys is getting exploded. Varys is 100% getting exploded in my mind.
Yeah.
So
I would say I think it's more likely that he gets killed in an accident, like Nina's saying, than executed.
Okay. Yeah.
Personally.
I think I tend to lean that way too, especially because the guy who would execute him, it seems like the guy who's going to be able to preside over King's Landing before things get really bad is Aegon VI, and Varys is like helping him take the throne. So I'm not sure he would have him killed. So yeah, I tend to agree with you guys. I don't think we're going to see Varys end the way Larys does. What about that weird line about cutting off his foot and magic feet? What's all that? Is just so weird. Unless we are to believe that all feet possess. I was like, okay.
It makes me think of Varys again because of his
penis, right?
Yeah, being cut off. Anyways, just
it's a different member.
Yeah. No, I read that as an intentional Varys parallel in terms of something being a body part being cut off and then being used for sorcery.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, I agree. That's seems fairly straightforward anyway. Okay, so Black Aly Blackwood. Let's talk about her.
I just want to say real quick, someone suggested a way for Varys to be killed. They said giant spider kills Varys, but I'm just laughing at the idea of a giant ice spider actually being what kills him.
That is really good. Varys killed by an ice spider. Oh man, that is good. That is really good. Okay, so Nina,
Black Aly.
Start with Black. Tell us about Black Aly.
I love Black Aly Blackwood. She is awesome.
Yes.
Black Aly Blackwood, she's the aunt of Bendikit Blackwood, and she's super kick-ass, commands her own archers. She's a super good archer herself, and she fought herself in the Battle of the King's Road / Muddy Mess, and she's. We hear first about Baela and Rhaena Targaryen going to Aegon III and saying, you should pardon Corlys Velaryon because otherwise you would be sans one ear. And Aegon says, I agree with you, but he has no weight. He doesn't actually have the executive power as a minor to be able to affect that. And so we get this scene, and it's a little bit of a cheat because, you imagine like who was the scribe in the corner like scribbling this all down between Cregan and Aly, like I gotta get this down. But it's really, really, really cute. We've got this scene of Alysanne arguing with Cregan as to why Corlys should be pardoned. And every time Alysanne offers an argument, Cregan's like, nope, I'm going to kill him. It's what needs to be done. This is what I'm going to do. And finally, Alysanne's like, fine, I will give you whatever you want. He's like, well, whatever you want. What could that possibly mean? And she, agrees to give him her hand in marriage. There's a very, very cute little play they have with that, and he does agree. Whether this is the only thing that actually moves him to pardoning Corlys, I don't know. That's certainly how it's presented. That's certainly the romantic view of it. I don't know that was might have been like 90%, but I don't know if that was the full 100% of what was motivating him, but it's certainly a really cute romantic story of it.
I agree, and this is where I turn back to my comment about maesterly bias, all those descriptions of them Northerns being savage, and I wonder if that's part of why Cregan seems so arbitrary to me, if they just kind of wrote him that way, the Maester's just maybe a little biased towards him, because this is even more arbitrary. I mean, I approve because, again, I'm on the side of peace at just about any cost, but he just gives up all his principled positions because this woman's willing to marry him. He's like, no, war, honor, blah, blah, blah. Oh, you're going to marry me? All right, I'm going home. Let's go. Let's get out of here. That changes everything. So to me, it's like, yes, I agree, but it also makes him kind of a hypocrite. But I still agree that he should do it. So
that being said, with the other thing with Cregan pardoning him is, I think part of it might have been as well that I think Cregan might have felt a little unwilling. Cregan might have felt a little bit unwilling in terms of killing him, simply because everyone else he could kind of dismiss as just sort of associated with Aegon II or associated with the Greens, but Corlys was his wartime ally. Corlys was someone who was fighting for the same side. They were fighting for the same cause. They were both, sort of these pro-Black supporters. And even though Cregan might have felt I'm doing the right thing, he's very explicitly admitted to killing the king. He said he would do it again. And there's no shades of gray here. It's very black and white. He's guilty. There's a little bit of reluctance of, do I really why am I killing my ally for killing my enemy? It's
yeah.
Well, you go to kind of Robb in A Storm of Swords when he has to kill Rickard Karstark. He knows it's the right thing to do. He knows it's the only just course he has, but he's not happy about it. He's really torn up about it. He's not happy at all because he knows this guy's sons died fighting for me. This guy was my loyal supporter. They killed Lannisters. To paraphrase Alice Karstark, the whole point of the war was to kill Lannisters.
Yeah.
How can I justify killing him? But it's the right thing to do. So I feel like Cregan might have felt that kind of reluctance, and then Aegon III and then Aly Blackwood kind of give him this out of, well, you could pardon him. And I think he's like, all right, I'll take it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I like it that way. Also, I think it's kind of interesting to point out that they don't actually get to have their wedding for a while. They do this agreement, and they both have to go their separate ways for quite a while as she leads. What's it called? The Widow Fairs. They have. This is a really interesting kind of setup for the future king of the Kingdom of the North and Riverlands that's formed by Robb Stark. Is that you have this kind of additional backdrop filled out with Stark men marrying all these Riverlander widows who lost their husbands during all the fighting during the dance. So O'Shea has some great art of Cregan and Black Aly as well.
This is from Fire and Blood. The two of them
from Fire and Blood, which is really cool. Cregan looks older than 21 here.
Yeah.
Or 23, I guess, at this point. This is after the dance. And and Aly doesn't necessarily look like the description that's given of her. That looks more like a kind of a princessy kind of courtly woman, and Ally's supposed to be kind of a tomboy. But whatever. It's good art, regardless of whether those are perfectly faithful to the characterizations. Mm-hmm. And we also have some art of Cregan and Black Aly from Naomi Makes Art, which I think this is probably a little more faithful to Black Aly, but and a much different take on Cregan, which I like. I can't say one is more accurate than the other for Cregan. I just like them both.
Yeah, and then we have one more by Naomi Makes Art, a romantic image of them getting married, I suppose.
Yeah,
something like that.
So the actual marriage takes place in 132 rather, and they have a cool ceremony where we actually hear that young Rickon sings, which is a little unusual for a northern heir to be a singer. But maybe I'm got the wrong impression about how the Northerners see singing. They like to sing, right? They sing they love the Bear and the Maiden Fair. So we have a couple of other questions about before the aftermath. One question that comes up is: could Cregan or would Cregan have wanted to / been able to stay in power? So Nina, what do you think about that?
Well, Gildane seems to suggest that he could have. He seems to think that Cregan could have stayed in power for the whole of Aegon's regency. I definitely disagree with that. I don't think he could have stayed in power that long. Could he stay in power for, a couple weeks, a couple months, maybe up to a year? Maybe. It's hard to say, because I think that it would have been very hard for Cregan to stay in power. He's facing down, now that kind of peace had been officially settled on, he has not only the Riverlord army in King's Landing, the Vale army in King's Landing, but now he's going to have all of these former Green supporters also kind of converging on King's Landing, ostensibly for Aegon III's coronation, but also to kind of snap up whatever governmental offices are available. All of them are going to have this kind of Southern bias against Northerners, and especially kind of one person keeping power over Aegon III, this foreigner sort of thing, this kind of culturally different person maintaining a secure hold on the king. Absolutely not. Maybe could have been on the Council of Regents, maybe, but I think that keeping the kind of power he had during the Hour of the Wolf, absolutely not.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think, yeah, you're right. He could have, if he really forced the issue, he could have held out for a little while, but not for the long term. And yeah, and I don't think he seems to have had much reason to. He wanted to go marry his new wife, and it was still winter in the north. He said that's a major reason for him to leave, and I believe him. I mean, that he stayed there so long in the first place because of that, and he does seem to really take his duty seriously in that regard. And I'm guessing he wasn't a big fan of being in the South either. He's like, boy, this place sucks. Y'all are just so slick and dishonest and all this stuff.
I can't even wear my furs. Yeah. I have all these furs and I can't wear a single one.
Well, and also the effect that his own regency had on him. I don't think Cregan wanted to kind of be a part of that. He saw how negative Bernard was when in terms of keeping power during his own regency. He might have thought, I don't want the temptation of that power. I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want anything. I came to see justice done. Justice has been done. It's time for me to leave.
That's a good way. That's a very good point. Yeah, he doesn't want to be a hypocrite. He lived through that himself. I didn't catch that, and that explains maybe why we did defer to the 10-year-old king, because he went through a very similar thing himself.
Absolutely.
Great catch. Okay, let's see. Let's see what other remaining lingering questions we have. Let's go back up to the wedding.
Super chats too that we got a while ago.
I took care of those two.
You did already say those?
Yeah, I took care of those two.
Oh, okay. I just missed you saying it. Apparently,
we have the follow up here on one of them, but I was going to save that for last.
Oh, okay. Well, I have someone who wants me to say I'm gonna type right now, and then they want me to say it right now as I type. I just want to see what the delay is, so I did that.
Okay. So now we know it. We have, I think it's probably about 6 seconds is typical. But
yeah, I did do tests a while ago, and there was variation depending on multiple things. It was sometimes 3 seconds, sometimes 6 seconds. It was kind of weird. So anyways.
Okay, so one of them, going back to the widow fairs for just a minute, one of the things that it did, according to the text, is, quote, revive worship of the old gods in the Riverlands. And House Tully and House Blackwood are mentioned specifically as getting the largest influx of northern husbands. And I think that's pretty neat. Just yet more background to kind of explain this natural affinity that the Riverlands and the North have for each other. It gives them more of a connection ethnically. As well as we're told that the couple of sellsword companies form during this time. One of them fully northern, and that's formed by, what was his name, Mad Hal?
Hallis Hornwood, I think, is Mad Hal, and then Timothy Snow
is the company of the Wolf Pack. Oh, we have the Wolf Pack and the Stormbreakers was the other one.
Yes, that's the one formed by Oscar Tully.
That's right. So that's pretty cool. You got other basically situations with soldiers who survived the war. They got to find something to do. A lot of them, of course, as we say, go to the Riverlands and establish new homes and get a chance to have a wife and a family. And a lot of other ones go off to Essos to fight. And since the Stormbreakers, I wonder if any of these companies will turn up. I assume that these are pretty much all defunct, but maybe George will decide that one of these guys pops up to Winds of Winter. Do you think maybe we'll see one of them, or do you think they're all going to be?
It's interesting to me because, we got in the world of Ice and Fire, and to me, I took it as that it was a still extant company at this point. We got the Company of the Rose, which was specifically formed by Northerners who were not happy that Torrhen had bent the knee. So Northmen and allegedly Northwomen as well went abroad and formed this Company of the Rose. But instead of actually joining the Company of the Rose or mentioning that, Hal Hornwood and Timothy Snow just formed their own company instead. I don't know, maybe it was the Company of the Rose had become kind of too associate at that point. I mean, we're talking a good almost century and a half after this had been formed. So it could be that they no longer really spoke the common tongue, no longer really worshiped the old gods, really were more kind of associated with lingering northern traits rather than an actually northern company. Could be that George simply forgot about it, which is entirely possible.
You never know.
But I would like, especially because we do have a couple of different POVs in Essos at this point, it would be nice if we got one or two kind of offhand mentions of some of these companies. Or cool. even in Dunk and Egg. I mean, we're obviously going to be going to the Disputed Lands at some point there. It would be nice to get sort of a mention of that as well.
That's a good point. Yeah, I do. I also agree with you that the Disputed Lands, our best chance to see them is through Dunk and Egg at some point in the future. Okay, a couple of the wrap-up questions. We have a question from Broken King, who's asked a question for you, Nina. Just wanted to ask you, no pressure, when we will get your take on Aegon III. Can't wait.
Well, thank you, first of all. I am very, very, very slowly making my way through Fire and Blood. I am doing, on my Tumblr, I've done different posts on each of the chapters and just kind of, random bullet point thoughts on all of them. I've gotten up through the Hooded Hand at this point. I know I've been really slow. I've had other things I've needed to do. Hopefully I can get that done soon-ish, and that will, those kind of chapters will sort of encompass my views on Aegon III. Whether or not I decided to write more about him, I think it's hard at this point. I think there's still over half of his life that we don't know about. So yeah. I think a full Aegon III analysis will have to wait for Fire and Blood Volume 2. But I will get more thoughts as I go through the last kind of 3 or 4 chapters in Fire and Blood.
Yeah, and that's really cool, by the way, folks, just to consider. We have, not only do we have more Aegon III coming, but Fire and Blood 2 will almost certainly have more Cregan Stark. We maybe will find out this mysterious Cregan dueling Aemon the Dragon Knight event that happened, which was almost certainly a duel recreation, not some sort of earnest real battle for some reason.
Fight to the death.
Yeah, well, and if it was, wow, then we know what killed Cregan because it wasn't what killed Aemon. And we also know that Aegon III had a good relationship with Cregan, at least as far as it seemed from a high level view. Like Aegon was never was able to fulfill the promise, as we know, but he did give heap honors on Cregan, as we're told. And Cregan ended up sending Rickon, his son, to fight in Aegon III's son's war, which is Daeron I, the young dragon, in conquering Dorne. Unfortunately, Rickon was killed very near the end of that war, and apparently that was a big deal in the North. He was a really popular, and it caused maybe a little bit of a succession issue, which is all in itself a great story, all part of the aftermath that we have labeled here in our document. And of course, as we said, Black Aly and Cregan went on to have 4 daughters: Sarra, Alice, Rhea, and Mariah. And as I said, we don't really know what families those kids married into. And unfortunately, Black Aly died somewhere, we don't know when, but Cregan remarried, had a 3rd wife named Lynara. And Lynara, she was a Stark. And right, she was a Stark, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And he eventually united his branches of his family. Rickon, even though he died, had 2 daughters, Sansa and Serena, and one of them, I think it was Serena, it doesn't matter, one of them married Jonel, which was one of his sons with Lynara.
I think Sansa married Jonel, and I think Serena married Edric.
Okay, yeah. And at first, Serena had married an Umber, and then that Umber died, I guess, and then she remarried her cousin. So, Stark cousin marriages, in effect. Lots of them. But it also it may have prevented a succession crisis, we're not sure. But I'm guessing that it helped. Anytime you unite the branches like that with a big family, it's often what they're trying to do, is to prevent war, or at least the possibility of war. And let's see, what else do we have here? I think that covers all our basic notes. There's plenty of other things we could say about aftermath here, but we got to stop at some point.
We go till midnight.
We could, we definitely could, but we won't. So let's see, Nina, tell everybody, again, remind everybody where to find you and remind everybody what you're working on next. And then we'll do our credits and say goodbye.
So you can find me on Tumblr, goodqueenaly.tumblr.com. That's goodqueenaly.tumblr.com. I have written a whole heck of a lot on Fire and Blood. If you search my tag for Fire and Blood Volume 1 specifically, that's everything I've written. If you search the tag Fire and Blood chapter analyses, those are the posts that I've been writing specifically about each of the chapters. Those are all of my thoughts. I'm very, very slowly getting through Fire and Blood. I'm slowly getting through my second Targaryen play. I am, every so often answering asks and writing posts and, showing up occasionally in the Facebook group to add thoughts.
Right on, yeah. It's true.
Mostly on Tumblr. So,
Cool.
Shoot me an ask if you want to.
Yeah, definitely do. She's very thorough with her answers, and I should say, and I have said, I'll say again, that a lot of the things you hear me say are influenced by Nina. We chat on Facebook quite a bit about everything fire related. From even like some of the things that are too nerdy even for these live streams. Really,
I don't know about that, Aziz, but I will say we got two comments here. One from John Del Vento, who asks, Nina, do you have Patreon or PayPal?
I don't.
Do you have coffee or anything on your Tumblr? I know that on Tumblr people they like
vibes.
Just good vibes. Okay.
Well, if you ever set up a Ko-fi account, we'll help share it around with people.
And we have I have two other things here I want to bring up. One is Nina has a lovely shirt on, a queen shirt, and I just wanted to make sure I highlighted her great shirt.
This was plan C of this shirt. I couldn't find my Stark shirt. All of my David Bowie shirts are packed, so I settled on Queen.
That's pretty awesome. We also have here, Gregor. A lot of people were talking about jokes in the chat. I don't remember how they got on it, but we have this. Gregory Namath found and I tried to find the source for it. I can't find out who originally came up with it. But someone came up with a joke for a man walks into a brothel with a honeycomb and an ass and a donkey. So so he asked that we share this joke as well, because I certainly really appreciate it. So I'll read this, okay? So this is Tyrion walking into a brothel, right?
Okay.
With a honeycomb and a donkey. My woman found a genie in a bottle, and he granted her 3 wishes. The first was for a house fit for a queen. So he gave her this damn honeycomb. The second wish was that she have the nicest ass in all the land. So he gave her this damn donkey. And the madam asks, what about the third wish? Tyrion goes, well, she asked the genie to make my cock hang down past my knee. The madam goes, that one's not so bad, eh? Tyrion goes, I used to be 6'3". So that's the joke, and I think it's pretty nice. I wish we knew who originally came up with it, but
what would Tywin think of his son in that case? He's like, my son is 6'3" and has this 5-foot long member. Is that something he would be proud of? Now that's a lion right there. Okay, folks. Thanks again for Nina for coming and sharing all these great thoughts with us. Thanks to Ashea for managing so many things at once. And thanks to our
like Will Ferrell,
like D'Angelo Vickers.
D'Angelo Vickers in the office, exactly.
Juggling without juggling, without dropping a single one.
I just caught one. It was floating in the air for a while. Anchor phrase. It's a very old joke, but it's a nice ASOF adaptation. That's what I was curious about, because I was guessing that like someone took like a proven joke and then like adapted it.
A proven joke.
But I didn't know. I'm really for sure. I'm glad to hear that.
That's like Maegor took wives of proven fertility. We need Mushroom takes jokes of proven humor.
Jokes of proven humor.
Jokes of proven humor, yes.
Okay, so thanks again, everybody. Thanks everybody. On that note, thanks to everybody who came live. Apparently, thanks to everybody for telling jokes in the chat today. Boy,
Yes.
my FOMO is really peaking today. I
Yeah,
really
there was
missed
a
out
lot of
on what was
jokes.
going on in the chat. So we will be back, like I said, next week. By next week, we should have a final announcement on Bloodraven 3, the three-eyed Bloodraven, we're calling it. And the topic for next week, since we changed it, I haven't announced yet, but we'll get that to you all shortly. So also, thanks to our patrons who make History of Westeros possible. You guys are basically our sponsors. We do occasionally get a corporate sponsor, but that is uncommon for us, and we appreciate the support of fans far more because we know you guys love the material. And, our sponsors are cool, but most of them aren't actually Game of Thrones fans. So, you know how it is.
Most of them actually are.
A lot of them are.
If they're, because if you're saying they're our sponsors, then that is the case.
Yeah, that's true. So thanks to Lord Mark of House Joseph, the Snow and Winterfell, rider of Mazlacartho, the white dragon with green scales, horns, wings, and talons, Jinx of House Lier, the green queen of the Rainwood, rumored daughter of a woods witch, rider of Erogenia, a sylphic albino dragon with amethyst eyes and opalescent wings. Thanks to the mysterious BR Hand of the King. Thanks to the Smiling Wolf, Lord Stephen Stark of the Broken Tower, soldier, scholar, philosopher, diplomat, Hand of Queen Ashea, who is known as the best, and who has gifts for you and not for me.
Oh, yeah. That's also true. I was like, what?
Thanks to Lady Suzanne Sinistral, the learned, holder of the left-handed Valyrian shears called Penance and Hand of the Beard. Thanks to Lord Jim the Fortuitous of Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire blog, Warden of the West. Lord George Stormsville the Cunning, Lord of the Chiliad and Warden of the East. Cabeth the Unfrozen, Lord of the Bricks and Castle Crimson Light, Defender of the Old Gods and Warden of the North. Lady Kelly McMath of Covington is Lady of the Villa Hills and Crescent Springs, Warden of the South. Lord James Tuttle is King of the Stepstones and the Narrow Sea, Commander of the Royal Fleet, consisting of the Narrow Fleet led by Flagship Caraxes, and the Bloodstone Fleet led by Flagship Prince Daemon. Our small council includes Lord Daniel the Sneaky Russian, Master of Ships, Grand Maester Via James, Lord Benjen of House Hornwood, Master of Laws. Lord Fabian Flowers, the Bastard of Greenshield, is Master of Coin. And, and our Master of Whispers is Johan. Boy, these names are making me cough today. Lords and ladies in their castles include Lady Direliz of Castle Naki, the Alpha Patron. Lord Dan of the Red Mountains and Castle Great Belt is Breaker of the Second Stone. Lord Skip of the Veldt is Lord of Castle Ganges. Gregor the Toasty is Lord of the Bread Fort. Alicia Everlasting is of the Green Blood, Lady of Desert Rose. Lord Ryan of Castle Stonegate is Guardian of the Rocky Mountain Pass. Lord Garin de Haviland is of Devil's Hand Keep. Ashlyn Winter is the Hawk's Eye, Lady of Castle Skyfall. Lady Mikkel of Moonacre is leader of the Werewood Protectorate Alliance. The Lord of the Halls of Castle Hillcrest is wielder of the Valyrian Steel Machete Everglazed. Lord Alistair Whitaker is Lord of the Dawnhold. Lord Bemmy Snugglebunny is Guardian Ranger of the Hidden 100-Acre Werewood, dual wielder of Valyrian short swords Glorious Morning and Little Light Wise. I can only get through that one out of every 4 times without making a mistake. Brian the Defender is Lord of the Spear Fort and the Freelands, last scion of Clan McCulloch, Strength and Courage. The Bastard of the Wolfswood is First Forester of the Old Gods. Sworn to House Iron Werewood, listen for the silence. Connor the Dungeon Master is Lord of Catamount Keep and Guardian of the Smoky Mountain Pass. Lady Baelish is Dark Widow of Harrenhal. Lord Sidney Jesse is the Fallborn, Lord of Blue Spring. Nevessa the Twin-Hearted is Suspected Skin Changer, is holder of Castle Carahelm. Sir Valentin of House de Jen is creator of the Game of Predictions, free Game of Thrones predictions / futures market. A link is on our supporters page. Lady Lyanna Kelly of Wolf Island is Protectress of the Steelhold. Casey Stark is of House Acres. Lady Kay of House Archer is Lady of Earthdog Hall, Huntress of the Wolfswood, and Guardian of Maddie Squirrelsbane, the mighty Direweedy. Our King's Justice is Sir Troy the Steady, wielder of the Valyrian Steel Blade Fate. We have our King's Guard, led by Lord Commander Miriam R., backed up by Sir Dolorous D., longest tenured White Sword, Willa Crowsbane, Guardian of White Tree, First Lady of the Free Folk, Sir Dean the White, Knight of the Black Star, Sir Jord of House Pepsi, the Beverage Knight. And we have our Queen's Guard.
Yes, we do.
Ready?
I am ready. We have Lord Captain Commander Haema Helmand, the Sellsword Sentinel. We have Alexander of House Atreides from the Seat of Dune. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. You must be really excited for the new Dune, huh? Alexander of House Atreides.
Oh, good point.
We've got Becca the Bard, Songbird of the North. Michonne the Melodious, Star of Old Town, Minds Over Masters. Ser Rambo, Knight of House Gannon, First Blood. Sarah Leon of House Walker, wielder of the twin Valyrian steel blades Fire and Ice and the werewood bow Rain. And we have Amber the Adamant, the Knight of the Mist and Mother of Squids. We've also gotten a super chat in this time from Gregory Namath, who says, thanks for the stream, guys. He's the one who submitted that joke.
That's right. Thanks for the joke, too. Yes, excellent job there. And we have here.
My Queen's High Council, Lady My Emerald Eyes, voice of House Swan, Mistress of Whisperers. Rebea Star Eyes, Lady of Waves and Mistress of Ships, Captain of the Iron Shadow Cat. In the shadows, we bear our claws. Grand Maester Elizabeth, middle daughter of Lyanna Mormont, First Lady to forge both the Silver and Valyrian Steel Link, and currently there are no masters or mistresses of coin or laws.
I forgot to add Bloody Ben Blackwood to your Queen's High Council. He's taken over as Master of Whisperers.
I'm sorry then.
That's cool. Lady Mai deserves an extra shout out. It's cool.
Definitely does, for sure. But so what's this name?
Bloody Ben Blackwood.
Oh, cool. That's very fitting considering our mention of Aly Blackwood.
Perfect, right?
So that's very nice.
Right on. So also the Beard Guard, led by Lord Commander George the Golden, backed up by Sir Joshua Oakhart, the White Oak, Lady Rita of the Coppermane, the Unbound, Dance the Fervor, Sir Jeff, Warden of the AC, wielder of Triad, the multifaceted beard of Platinum, Red, and Brown, Stay Frosty, Sir Tim Corgyle is Mad Boy of the Western Desert, Queen Helena von Landstein is partying like it's 1999 since 1980-something, a kingdom for a drink. And last but not least, the History of Westeros Night's Watch, which is led by Lord Commander Benjen Umber, the Silent Giant, wielder of Valyrian Steel Greatsword Winter's Kiss, First Builder Maegor Snow, a.k.a. Maegor the Cool, the Fire in the Snow, First Steward Sir Jurion of the Torrentine is called Pale Wind, and First Ranger Source Delica of House Gramercy rounds out the list. Thanks again, everybody, for supporting us on Patreon. You can join the list of shout-outs by going to historyofwesteros.com and clicking on the Patreon link there. We include other offers like early access to episodes, Patreon-only episodes, of which there are 3 right now.
Our firstborn child.
That's right. Episode voting and the aforementioned shout-outs. So all sorts of fun stuff like that. And I keep waiting to announce when we're going to start Season 8 coverage, but there still hasn't been a trailer. I guess we're probably just going to have to make our own way.
Maybe we have to decide that, but I feel like we get the trailer and then we're like, okay, well, we're covering it now.
Yeah,
That's it. That's the line. I don't know.
Yeah,
but it certainly won't be before March 12th.
Yeah,
because that's our Sea Snake episode. So it'll be after March 12th, which is just about perfect because that's what we wanted, was about a month beforehand.
Yeah, I think so. So look out for that. But we'll just keep y'all posted. But if you guys see a trailer, well, you know that we'll have our coverage will be starting soon after that. But if not, it'll be starting soon anyway. Okay, well, that's it for today. Thanks again, Nina. And thanks again, Shea, and everybody else who came. Thanks to Michael Clarfeld for the music. And
thank you to my friend who brought me a smoothie, and not Aziz one.
He's just off screen. Hey, yes. Thanks for the smoothie. Okay, everybody, we'll see y'all next time. Valar Rereadus. Adios.